There is a number written into the first second of time that decided whether anything would happen. Nothing in the equations required it to be one thing rather than another. It was simply, in the end, what it was. Call it eta, a dimensionless ratio, the number of surviving baryons per photon in the present universe. Our universe carries a value of approximately 6 times 10 to the negative 10 one baryon for roughly every 1.6 billion photons. This episode asks what follows if that number were instead 6 times 10 to the negative 11, 1/10 as large, one order of magnitude lower on a logarithmic axis. It emerges from the annihilation epoch, when matter and antimatter destroyed each other almost perfectly. Almost. The Sakharov conditions, CP violation, baryon number non-conservation, departure from thermal equilibrium permit this asymmetry, but do not predict its magnitude. The observed value is a free parameter. No derivation selects it. Reduce it by a factor of 10, and the cosmos exits that annihilation epoch with 1/10 the matter it would otherwise hold. A different arithmetic, with consequences that propagate forward across every subsequent Hubble time. The value of eta has no derivation. It is not predicted by the standard model, not required by thermodynamics, not written into any symmetry principle we know. The Sakharov conditions, baryon number violation, C and CP asymmetry, departure from thermal equilibrium are necessary precursors, but they constrain only the shape of the mechanism, not its output. Eta itself is a free parameter, measured, not deduced. Our universe reads roughly 6 times 10 to the negative 10. It could, consistent with all known physics, read 6 times 10 to the negative 11. That single displacement, one order of magnitude on a logarithmic axis, is the premise. Everything that follows is arithmetic. At recombination, the primordial plasma released its photons and fell silent. What remained were density perturbations, faint compressions in the hydrogen-helium gas. Growth requires exceeding the gene's mass, the threshold at which a cloud's self-gravity overcomes its thermal pressure. With eta 10 times smaller, the seeds never germinate. Molecular hydrogen forms too sparsely to radiate heat away. Marginally self-gravitating clouds contract, heat, stall, and re-expand. No runaway, no ignition. Consider what chemistry survives. Hydrogen, helium, a trace of lithium, 3 elements, and the third barely present. The periodic table in this universe ends at the second row. No carbon means no covalent scaffolding, no molecular chains of arbitrary length, no way to store and copy information in matter. No oxygen means no water, no oxidation, no thermodynamic gradient that a process could climb. The universe's only spectral signature is the 21-centimeter spin flip of neutral hydrogen against a perfectly featureless background. One emission line, repeated everywhere, identical, encoding nothing. To ask what this cosmos looks like is already to have committed a category error. The verb looks requires an I, and an I requires a history this universe never had. One way to read the Sakharov conditions is not as a recipe, but as a minimum. 3 criteria, jointly satisfied to a degree that no physical law demanded, and the result fell, narrowly, on the side where gradients form, where disequilibrium persists long enough to do work, where pockets of low entropy become briefly available for something as improbable as self-reference. Reduce eta by 1 order of magnitude and the floor is missed. There is no structure. There is, therefore, no observer to register the absence. Thought on this reading is not a late flowering of a complex universe. It is a direct downstream consequence of whether a dimensionless number, fixed in the first second, cleared a particular arithmetic threshold, with no derivation and no necessity behind the clearing. The gene's mass, the threshold a cloud must exceed before gravity overcomes pressure, depends on baryon density. Lower that density by 10, and the perturbations emerging from recombination are too shallow, too sparse. They oscillate. They do not collapse. Without the molecular hydrogen pathways to radiate heat away, even marginally self-gravitating clouds cannot shed the thermal pressure resisting contraction. No cloud reaches the ignition threshold for nuclear fusion. The dark ages in this universe are not a prelude. They are the permanent condition, density fluctuations propagating indefinitely through an isothermal fog, gravity and pressure, balanced in a stalemate that a Hubble time does nothing to resolve. What this universe actually contains is a spectrum with no lines. Hydrogen and helium, uniformly distributed, absorb nothing because there is nothing to absorb, no heavier nucleus, no electron orbital tuned to any wavelength we might send through it. The cosmic microwave background is still present, still cooling, still a perfect blackbody curve unmarked by any foreground structure. No absorption trough, no emission spike. A signal so clean it would read to any instrument as silence. The word barren already imports too much. It implies a surface, a geology, a place where something might have grown. There is no surface. There is no place. There is a medium slowly thinning at a temperature declining toward a floor it will reach in time measured in trillions of years. There is no derivation for the number, no equation whose solution is 1 baryon per billion photons. Eta is a residue, what remained after cancellation, and cancellation itself required 3 independent conditions to align, to a precision that sits in no theory's prediction interval. One way to read this is that minds capable of formulating the Sakharov conditions are not a late elaboration of a complex universe. They are a direct consequence of whether a particular ratio exceeded a particular floor during the first second of time. Cognition on this reading is not downstream of stars, or chemistry, or evolution. It is downstream of arithmetic, and the arithmetic had no obligation to cooperate. Cooling is the bottleneck. For a primordial cloud to collapse, it must shed thermal energy faster than gravity can deepen the potential well. Molecular hydrogen, the only efficient radiator available in a metal-free universe, forms too slowly at lower baryon densities to matter. The cloud oscillates. Pressure restores what gravity began to claim. A Hubble time passes, then another. The density contrast simply rings like a bell in a room where no one is listening. The thread closes on a specific failure of language. To ask what this universe looks like is to smuggle in an observer a surface, a retina, a nervous system downstream of carbon chemistry and stellar ash. None of those exist here. The universe does not darken at the edges of some imagined gaze. It simply is, in every direction, at every frequency, the same. A hydrogen-helium medium cooling toward thermodynamic equilibrium, undisturbed by structure, unwitnessed by anything that the physics of this place could have assembled. The question was never whether life would find it difficult. The question dissolves before it forms. Cognition may be the wrong frame entirely. What the threshold argument suggests is not that minds are fortunate, but that minds are a resonance condition. Below a certain eta, the universe produces no gradient steep enough to drive any process toward local order. Ours may sit near that floor, we cannot say how near, or whether the floor is a cliff or a long slope. We can only say that one order of magnitude lower, the universe offers nothing to argue with. One order of magnitude separates the universe that notices itself from the universe that does not. The question this leaves us with is not theological but arithmetic. What is the minimum number, the precise residue from the first second, below which no question can ever be formed about any number at all? The oscillations never stop. Density perturbations, the faint acoustic ripples written into the plasma before recombination, continue to propagate through the hydrogen-helium gas, but at a tenth the baryon density they carry insufficient gravitational momentum. Without collapse, there are no population III stars, no ultraviolet flux, no reionization, no clearing of the neutral fog. The dark ages do not end. They extend indefinitely into isothermal suspension. The periodic table of this universe has two entries: hydrogen, helium. Every other element, carbon, oxygen, iron, silicon, requires a stellar interior, and there are no stellar interiors. The chemistry of life, of rock, of rust, of glass, absent not by catastrophe but by arithmetic. What remains is a diffuse intergalactic medium of two gases, slowly cooling across billions of years, structureless and uniform. No absorption lines cross its spectrum. Lines require atoms with complex electron shells, and those atoms were never forged. The universe is not dark in the way a room is dark. It is featureless in the way a number can be featureless. No digits after the decimal, no remainder, nothing to read. The Sakharov conditions are not a recipe, they are a verdict. Charge parity violation, baryon number non-conservation, departure from thermal equilibrium, three independent facts about early physics, each satisfied to a specific degree, none of them required by any deeper law to land where they did. What they produced was eta, one surviving baryon per billion photons, not one per 100 million, not one per 10 billion, this particular number. And the threshold argument does not say we were chosen. It says there is a floor, a specific arithmetic below which no gradient forms, no disequilibrium persists long enough, no low entropy pocket opens into which complexity might recursively descend. We sit one order of magnitude above that floor. There is no equation that demanded it. Cooling is the gate. For a primordial hydrogen-helium cloud to collapse, it must radiate away thermal energy faster than gravity can compress it. The primary pathway is molecular hydrogen, H2, whose rotational transitions carry heat into the void. In a metal-free primordial medium, H2 cannot form on dust grains because there are no dust grains. Dust is itself a product of stars that do not yet exist. Instead, H2 forms through gas phase reactions. The H- channel, where a free electron attaches to a hydrogen atom to form H-, which then donates that electron to a second hydrogen atom to produce H2. The rate of this reaction scales with baryon density and with the residual free electron fraction from recombination. At 1/10 R eta, both are depleted. The H- pathway runs too slowly to matter. The clouds remain warm. Warm gas resists compression. The gene's mass, the threshold at which self-gravity overtakes thermal pressure, sits perpetually above the mass of any cloud that actually exists. Gravitational runaway never begins, not delayed, not slowed, simply never begun. This universe has a two-element vocabulary, hydrogen and helium, but a vocabulary implies speakers. Consider the spectrum of this universe. No absorption lines, because absorption requires atoms with electron transitions above heliums, and those atoms do not exist. Every line of the electromagnetic spectrum that astronomers use to read distance, temperature, composition, velocity, redshift, the Lyman series, the calcium doublet, the 21-centimeter hyperfine transition of hydrogen in molecular clouds, nearly all of it is silent. What remains is a featureless continuum, the microwave background cooling toward 2 Kelvin, and nothing else writing itself into the light. The question is not why the ratio favored us. The question is whether there is a minimum number, a specific integer relationship between baryons and photons, below which the universe contains no process capable of posing questions. We may have found it, not through derivation, not through necessity, but by sitting 1 decimal place above silence. Cognition in this reading is not a late flowering of complexity. It is what happens when eta clears a threshold that nothing in the laws of physics required it to clear. Molecular hydrogen is the gate that never opens. Consider what lies behind it. At recombination, density perturbations in this universe exist, but they are shallower, their amplitude diluted by the reduced weight of baryons against the photon pressure that preceded them. The gene's mass, the minimum threshold for gravitational collapse, sits comfortably above any available overdensity. Gravity pulls, thermal pressure answers. No cloud tips into runaway. The dark ages that follow are not a passage between epochs. They are the final state. No population III ignition. No ultraviolet flux to reionize the neutral fog. The universe remains neutral, cool, and structureless, density waves still propagating through the hydrogen-helium medium, oscillating endlessly, never crossing the arithmetic line that separates perturbation from collapse. Consider what remains when the observer problem is not merely difficult but structurally impossible. No carbon means no covalent bonding. No covalent bonding means no polymers, no membranes, no catalytic surfaces. No liquid phase chemistry means no thermodynamic disequilibrium to harvest. The universe does not become hostile to life. Hostility implies a contest. It becomes indifferent at the level of atomic grammar. Hydrogen and helium can form no sentences. And so the question, what would an observer witness already smuggles in the conclusion? Witness requires a witnessing structure, and this universe closes off every physical pathway by which such a structure assembles. The darkness is not experienced, it simply continues. The Sakharov conditions ask only that three criteria be met: CP violation, baryon number non-conservation, thermal non-equilibrium. They do not specify by how much. The arithmetic that followed was not required to land where it did. There is no equation whose solution is our eta. What exists instead is a threshold. Below a certain ratio, no gradient forms, no disequilibrium persists long enough to accumulate, and the universe, though fully law-governed, produces nothing that could be called consequence. Our ratio sits one order of magnitude above that floor, not safely, one order of magnitude. The dark ages of this universe do not end. Density perturbations exist, ripples pressed into the plasma by acoustic oscillations, but their amplitude, scaled against a baryon density 1/10 of ours, never approaches the gene's threshold. Molecular hydrogen forms too slowly. Cooling rates fall by roughly 2 orders of magnitude, the square of the density reduction, since collisional processes scale as baryon density squared, stranding the gas above the threshold where collapse could begin. Marginally self-gravitating clouds oscillate, contract slightly, reheat, and expand again. No runaway, no ignition. What remains is not darkness as absence, but uniformity as completeness. A hydrogen-helium medium, cooling across the Hubble time without absorption lines, because there is nothing with the electronic complexity to absorb. No iron K-alpha, no oxygen edge, no calcium doublet. The spectrograph of this universe returns a featureless continuum, the most information-poor message a cosmos can transmit. To ask what an observer would see is already to have smuggled in a precondition. The carbon, the phosphorus, the organized disequilibrium that the word observer quietly requires. The universe does not go unwitnessed because witnesses are absent. It goes unwitnessed because witness is a phenomenon that hydrogen and helium at these densities cannot compose. The threshold argument does not require fine-tuning in the strong sense. No designer, no dial, no intention. It requires only that there exists a number below which the universe produces no gradient steep enough to store information, no disequilibrium deep enough to be spent on local order. Our eta sits one order of magnitude above that number, not safely above it, not comfortably above it, one order of magnitude. What this means for the question of mind is not that consciousness was intended, but that it was arithmetically gated, that the capacity to ask why anything exists rather than nothing is itself a downstream consequence of whether a ratio, fixed in the first second, exceeded a particular integer threshold. The question was always less theological than it seemed. It was always, at its root, a question about a number. Even marginally self-gravitating clouds in this universe carry a structural liability. Molecular hydrogen, the principal coolant that allows primordial gas to shed thermal energy and contract, forms too slowly in a medium too thin to sustain reaction rates. Cooling times exceed the Hubble time. The gene's mass is never exceeded. There is no runaway, no population III ignition. The universe crosses a Hubble time still in its first sentence. The observer problem here is not rhetorical. Carbon enables the covalent bonds that permit information storage. Phosphorus enables the energy gradients that drive it. Liquid water enables the solvent medium that allows molecular interaction at all. Remove stellar nucleosynthesis, and you do not merely remove the organisms. You remove the substrate, the architecture, the thermodynamic precondition. What persists is a medium of two elements cooling toward equilibrium, with no surface to reflect light and no structure to cast shadow. The question, what would it look like, already assumes a looker, and a looker is precisely what this arithmetic will not permit. At recombination, the shallower density perturbations leave the gene's mass, the minimum threshold for gravitational collapse, perpetually unmet at every relevant scale. Clouds drift forward through the dark ages, marginally bound but never tipping into runaway. The catalytic pathway through H- ions is starved before it begins. No collapse, no ignition, no ultraviolet flux. A Hubble time passes. Density perturbations continue oscillating, acoustic ghosts in a medium that will never congeal. Consider the spectrum of this universe. Every absorption line that marks the presence of oxygen, carbon, iron, silicon, every dark notch that tells a spectrograph what a star is made of is absent. Not redshifted, not faint. Absent. There is no periodic table entry beyond helium that has ever been synthesized, no surface from which light could scatter, no medium through which a wave could carry chemical information. The observable universe is a featureless thermal gradient, cooling on a schedule determined entirely by its own expansion. No disequilibrium, no contrast, nothing to select against uniformity. The question of what this universe contains has a complete answer in two elements and one equation. The question of what it looks like has no answer at all because the word looks already assumes a witness, and the conditions for witnesses were foreclosed before the first billion years had passed. There is no derivation that compels eta to be 1 in a billion rather than 1 in 10 billion. The Sakharov conditions specify the shape of the asymmetry, not its magnitude. What we inherit from that first second is not a design but a residue, a number that happened to clear a threshold it had no obligation to clear. One way to read this: minds are not a late ornament of complexity, but a direct resonance of arithmetic. The ratio had to exceed a specific value before the universe could produce the disequilibrium from which questioning itself becomes possible. We did not witness a generous cosmos. We witnessed a number that was large enough. Without runaway collapse, the dark ages continue. Density fluctuations in the hydrogen-helium fog oscillate, compressing, rebounding, compressing again. But the threshold into gravitational runaway is never crossed. Molecular hydrogen forms too slowly to radiate away the thermal energy collapse would require. The clouds remain warm enough to resist themselves. A Hubble time passes, then another. The universe persists, structureless. The word looks is already the error. To look requires a looker, some arrangement of matter dense enough, differentiated enough to gather and process light. In this universe, matter never achieved differentiation. Hydrogen and helium, cooling, expanding, neither condensing nor organizing, offer no surface from which light scatters meaningfully, no gradient across which chemistry might begin its slow ascent toward complexity. The question, what does this universe look like, presupposes an observer the universe's own arithmetic has made impossible. There is no vantage point. There is no witness. There is only the background radiation, cooling by itself in the dark, with perfect indifference and perfect uniformity, speaking to no one. The threshold argument does not require fine-tuning in the strong sense. No designer, no intention, no selection. It requires only arithmetic. Below a certain value of eta, the universe produces no gradient steep enough for complexity to climb, no disequilibrium, no low entropy pockets where structure can borrow time against the debt of entropy. Our ratio sits one order of magnitude above that floor, which means that mind, not as a late flowering of a generous cosmos, but as a direct downstream consequence of whether a dimensionless number cleared a particular integer threshold during the first second of existence, are themselves a kind of resonance, not of physics, of arithmetic. The fate of this universe is not collapse, not crunch, not even the slow cooling of heat death. It is oscillation without resolution. Density perturbations compress and rebound across a Hubble time, arriving nowhere. The gene's mass is never breached at any scale. Without contraction, the criterion recedes further. The dark ages do not end. They simply continue, isothermal and uniform, density waves writing the same unfinished sentence across 10 billion years. 2 elements. That is the complete inventory. Hydrogen and helium, no carbon to form chains, no oxygen to dissolve them, no nitrogen, no phosphorus, no sulfur. The periodic table in this universe ends at the second entry, not because heavier nuclei are forbidden by physics, but because the furnaces that would have forged them never lit. Chemistry here is not impoverished. It is not chemistry at all. It is 2 gases, cooling, thinning, drifting apart in a medium with no gradient steep enough to matter, no surfaces, no interfaces, no phase boundaries where complexity might have accumulated. The universe has a vocabulary of 2 words. It has never composed a sentence. The image you are looking at is not empty. Every photon that reaches you from this direction has traveled through a universe in precise, unremarkable equilibrium. The hydrogen is there diffuse, cold, evenly distributed across distances that have no name because no one named them. The helium is there. The ratio is there. 1 baryon for every 10 billion photons, a number that required no argument, no permission, no deviation from the equations. From that number, not from malice, not from design, nothing followed. No collapse, no carbon, no question. We arrived at consciousness by a margin of arithmetic so thin that the number which saved us has no derivation we can point to and call sufficient. Whether it knew, that is precisely the kind of question only a universe with a different ratio can ask.